Welcome to the Seattle Overload podcast, where the Seahawks are playing at the Los Angeles Rams in Week 11. It's time to preview that matchup, and I'm joined by a perfect guest for that. Head of NFL Info at Underdog Fantasy, Sosa Kremenjas. Sosa, what's up?
How's it going, Maddie? It's good to be on. Part two of the Rams Seahawks. It feels like it's been forever since they last played, but it's two teams in an interesting spot here. So we're starting to get into that thick of the NFL season where things start to shake out. So I'm ready to go.
Right, week 1 to week 11. It feels like last year almost. And hopefully from a Seahawks perspective it is, but we'll get into that. How did you are a Rams fan, yes? I mean, visual watchers, Sosa has a very nice Rams logo behind him.
Correct. Yes, that is correct. That is some sort of like an alternate logo. It's not actually I couldn't do the actual one, so I went with that one. But yeah, I got a kind of a weird story when it came to becoming a Rams fan. So originally, I'm not from North America. I came to Canada. I'm in Canada, for those that don't know. I've been here since 2000, and ever since I came here, as you can imagine, 2000, the Rams were pretty good at that time. They're coming off a Super Bowl victory. Me and my brother borrowed a football game from a friend. I can't recall which one it was. I'm going to guess it was probably Madden, but I don't know for certain. And it was a demo, and there was two teams on there. And, coming off the Super Bowl was the Rams and the Titans. And my brother's older than me, so he's generally better, at a lot of things when we were kids growing up, better at video games in this case. And so I got the better team, which was the Rams, and it kind of just, stuck that way and never changed. So I think part of it too was, I liked the gold uniforms at the time, like the yellowish gold. So that was really it. And I just stuck with it through and through. And I'm not really sure why. Sometimes I question that decision, especially, the 2007 through 2012 range.
Yeah.
But, it paid off. So
There you go. Hey, they had some fun. Well, I don't know if fun's the right word. They had some violent-y type of defenses in that kind of period. They were
yeah.
trying, kind of.
Yeah, that was weird. I remember around 2014, somehow we always had the Seahawks number, the Jeff Fisher days.
Oh, man.
Always some sort of weird fake punt that would like put us
Yep.
over the top and barely win us the game. So, there was that. But yeah, those days weren't great, unfortunately.
Well, it's very nice to have a fellow European on the show. I didn't know that about you. Dope.
Yeah.
Not often that happens. Look at us in the NFL. So,
Yeah.
what's your impression of the Seattle Seahawks? Obviously, when we have guests on, sometimes they're a bit less familiar, but as you mentioned, this NFC West matchup.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I generally think it's a really solid team, explosive. And you start on the offensive side of the ball, right? It's going to go as far as Geno sort of, allows the Seahawks to. And I think there's probably a lower ceiling with him than there is with some other guys. But at the same time, I think generally Geno's got a really solid floor, right? So, you look around, there's just so many good weapons on that offensive side of the ball. And, three really good receivers, obviously, two running backs that are really good. And I think generally, you want to get healthy on that offensive line. I'm not entirely sure what the state of it as of yet. I'm assuming probably that right tackle is still a little bit questionable right now. But, when you get back to health there, I think the offense is probably in a good spot. And obviously, I'm familiar with Shane Waldron being, formerly on the Rams staff. And then, on the flip side of the ball, some losses and some injuries. Jamal Adams kind of going in and out. And then Nwosu, I believe, is out for the rest of the year, if I'm not mistaken. And then, a recent addition in Leonard Williams. But, man, there's a lot of talent on that side of the ball. You're looking at the Devin Witherspoons now, who are budding stars. And obviously, across from him, you had a Pro Bowl rookie corner last year in Woolen. And so generally just a good team, and I think the Seahawks know what they do well, and they're happy to do that consistently. Very explosive on offense, and as a selfish manner, I would say I'd like to see JSN maybe a little bit more involved down the field and, less in that short game. But yeah, I mean, it's a good team. I wouldn't be shocked if, the Seahawks can get to the playoffs, maybe win a game in the playoffs and ultimately, maybe even win the division. I think San Fran's probably favored still, but they're definitely going to be in that discussion.
Selfish with JSN. Have you got some fantasy stock in him?
You know what? I actually don't. I just generally, I would call myself a football fan, a purist to some extent. So there's just guys around the league that, we all kind of want to see succeed and in certain positions. So no, I don't actually have any fantasy football stock in JSN. I will say I did draft him originally, though I did drop him way
Oh,
back
you
when.
gave
So
up.
yes, I did. It was a smaller league, so there was a lot of quality on the waiver wire list, and I could make a little bit of an impactful kind of change there. But yeah, so no personal stock there.
Fair enough. Yeah, you mentioned Seahawks right tackle situation. For those who missed the podcast yesterday, Abraham Lucas, who was the projected starter, did suit up for a bit of week 1, and then the knee pain he's been dealing with held him out, put him on IR. He's been limited participant in practice this week, so he might make his way back. The rest of the line's fine, but they've currently been putting 41-year-old Jason Peters on the right side, and he's been showing that his technique is a very polished, multiple Pro Bowl, all-pro vet player, but he's still 41 years old, so there are some limitations there. Right. So the Rams, if you hadn't been paying attention, Seahawks fans, they've lost their last 3 games. They have 3-6, which is kind of nuts, but then you factor in Matthew Stafford getting injured. Is it as simple as they've lost what I believe, on his day, could be a top 5 quarterback, certainly a top 10 passer in the league?
I mean, I think that's a large part of it, obviously, right? There's really no team that's probably equipped to handle a quarterback loss in the NFL. That's just the value of the position, unfortunately, for, NFL teams. But I think it definitely goes deeper than that too, right? I mean, you look at this roster up and down, it's just not that great. I mean, it really isn't. The defensive side of the ball is very, very lean in terms of what they can offer this team. And you start to see that creep up every now and again. There's certain games where, a minute left in the half versus the Eagles, somehow it's almost assumed that you're going to give up at least 3 points, and then, they find a way to give up 7. So it feels like, if they can get a stop, generally for me, if they can get a stop, I feel like that's a huge win. Never mind, holding a team to 14 points or something like that. So, defensively, they just don't have a lot of talent, and we knew that going into this season. And then on the offensive line, I think there's been a few injuries. They lost the left tackle for a game or two. They lost Rob Havenstein, the right tackle, the last few games. But in general, it's just not been that great. It's too inconsistent. I think they've shown a lot of flashes that they've been a lot better than last year, and they can be maybe an average unit in the league. But they haven't strung together multiple games where I feel comfortable in the sense that you feel good with Matthew Stafford back there. And the Rams generally have a longer developing style offense where Stafford's going to hold that ball and he's waiting for guys to get to the first down marker, if not to that 12 to 15 yard range. And him being, the guy he is, we know that he's struggled to stay healthy over the course of his entire career. That's a concern. That's an issue. So I think there's much more than, just the Stafford stuff. But, at the end of the day, I think if number 9 is playing, the Rams generally have a good shot to at least be competitive, if not, win certain games. But I mean, it's a flawed roster at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because they were playing so well and they're playing so gritty, and the way that they beat Seattle, kind of coming back on the road, and Stafford looking so impressive, Puka Nacua coming out of nowhere. It's like, hold on a second, why can't this team be really good, maybe be contending? But they've kind of, with NFL tendencies become a thing. I think teams kind of catch up. Week 1's always a bit funky as well. Not to, they have 2 other wins as well. But yeah, that this losing slide, even with Stafford not healthy, it may suggest some other things. And I've seen you tweeting about the kind of draft picks of the team, which shows how rough it got. And you're mentioning how franchise quarterback, left tackle, and edge rusher are big needs. And I know picks like you're a big fan of Steve Avila, the guard they took in the 2nd round at left guard, and I know he had a really good game against Seattle. He kind of owned who was playing 3-tech at the time there. Draymond Jones. Everyone was really concerned. Is Draymond Jones a bust because in terms of free agency ad because of how well Avila played? But is it the case that 2023 is kind of the first year of picks hitting, which they need to hit, and they're kind of paying the price for general manager Les Snead, and his aggression? Obviously, it resulted in a Super Bowl W, so it's probably worth it. But yeah, is it a year too soon almost?
You know what's crazy? My phone is going crazy. I'm looking at it. Breaking news right now. Joe Burrow is out for the year.
Wow.
Yes, that is
Do you have to react to that?
Luckily, I am not required to be around as of now, but goodness, that's you talk about big news to break.
Broke by head of NFL info Underdog Fantasy to the Seattle Overload show. What an honor.
There you go. I mean, you couldn't have asked for anything better. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of where the Rams are at right now, I think this was generally expected, at least from the team perspective, right? Fans are always generally going to be looking at things in a positive light and want to compete and that kind of thing. And I think the idea this year is to, sort of be competitive, be in that 7 to 9 win range, start to build a bit of that foundation and lay figure out who's going to be around for the next, few years and who you can build around. And then next year, I think was sort of the plan where you start to push the chips in the middle of the table. They're going to go into the offseason with a lot of free agency money available, a lot of cap space available. They ate a lot of money this year on the books on purpose, trimming the roster, getting rid of a lot of important players from previous years. And then two, again, you look at, not being active at the trade deadline. It just speaks to them wanting to have as much ammunition as possible going into this offseason to be able to stock up as much as they can with this roster. So I think next year is going to be an interesting season because the Rams, I think, are going to go into it with the idea that they can probably be sort of where the Seahawks are right now, in the sense that you want to get in the playoffs, you want to maybe win a game in the playoffs, maybe shock the world, win two, but you maybe don't look at yourself as a true Super Bowl, top 4 contender for that title. But then, you go into the next year with the idea that, okay, we've now taken that next step. There's that final step to really get to that title contender shot. But I think next year is going to be important and interesting in that regard because I think they're going to really be open to being able to play it by how things sort of unravel in terms of their performance to expectation. When you get to the trade deadline, if the team's 6-1 or whatever, 7-1, I can't even remember what week it comes in now, you might want to be a little bit more willing to kind of push the chips in the middle of the table versus, if you're 4-4 or whatever, you can maybe just expect to get to the playoff type thing. So I think this year is just a transitional year to get into next year. And this offseason is obviously going to be absolutely paramount to discern where the Rams are going to head over the next couple of years. But, yeah, with how they've played this offseason, how they played this season, they've kept guys around, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Donald, and they've done that for a reason. It really tells me that, this is kind of that stepping stone year. And then next year, they're going to really try to start to get aggressive to build the rest of that roster out.
Yeah, it must be exciting that next year in the draft, 2024, they have first round pick, second round pick, and a third round pick, right? It's been a while.
Yeah, you know what? The last time the Rams picked in the first round was 2016, Jared Goff. So
what?
Yes, it's
it's time.
Yeah, it is time. Yeah, I think it was the longest stretch without a first round pick since the Washington, I guess I'll call them the franchise because they were a different team at that time, in the 60s or 70s. I think they went 10 years without a first round pick. So,
jeez. So kind of on that subject, I know you tweeted that with a clown car in reaction to that Carson Wentz pickup at quarterback. We talked about how Stafford got hurt and that kind of coincided along with Seattle poaching Brett Ripien of the practice squad to possibly just gain intel for on the Rams as their upcoming opponent. But, first round pick, depending on how high that is, with how the draft looks loaded at quarterback, I haven't dived into it enough, but I know that's the consensus from those who know more than me. Are you hoping kind of that is a quarterback?
Yeah, I'm still kind of undecided. Like you, I haven't dove into the tape, so I can't, put my pin on which prospect I'd gamble my career on type thing. But, I would certainly be open to it. I think there's maybe 5 players that I'm sort of hoping that the Rams can be in range for, or 5 to 6, maybe 7 players, considering the top receiver Marvin Harrison, the quarterbacks obviously, left tackles, maybe an edge rusher, and then the tight end out of Georgia or something. But it really remains to be seen. I think if you're picking high enough or you're close enough to be able to trade up where it's not going to kill you, and it's going to be expensive regardless, I would certainly think that I would be in favor of that discussion, if you can, partially because the Rams have only given Sean McVay one opportunity to go get his guy, and his guy was Matthew Stafford, obviously, and that panned out pretty well. But I would very much like to see that process repeated to where, you start to look at a more long-term stable sort of opportunity.
Yeah,
because
that's terrifying because, like, what he did with guys off the scrap heap, like John Wolford in that playoff game against Seattle, he clearly knows how to build an offense within his vast scheme, but he knows how to structure a thing for a guy's strengths. Even I mean, heck, it's Carson Wentz, but you can sort of envision, hey, McVay could win a game with him. So if it's then his choice in the first round of a quarter, that's concerning for the NFC West, for the Seahawks, the
Right.
NFL.
Right. And yeah, I tend to think that way too. I mean, you look at Jared Goff, we were talking about him as one of the biggest busts maybe ever coming out of his rookie season. And to be fair to him, it was a horrible situation that he was in.
Yeah.
But right away, just Sean McVay turns around and a year later they're in the Super Bowl, albeit maybe not because of Jared Goff, but he was,
No, but that
pretty similar.
offense was amazing,
Right.
unbelievable.
Exactly. So, I tend to think that, I would envision that type of Drake May. A lot of people are comparing him to a Justin Herbert, where it's like, wow, imagine having a quarterback like that paired with Sean McVay for the next, 7 years or whatever until he's gone. That is the type of thing that excites me. So, yeah, I mean, I think everything has to be in play for the Rams here, and it really ultimately depends on where they land. If they land, at number 12, maybe you're talking about a different decision versus if they are picking in the top 6, might not be as expensive to move up. So, yeah, I think everything has to be on the table.
Yeah, and I know Stafford would turn 36. I think his birthday's early in the year, next year, and there's been murmurings around his, considering retirement. I know, as you've mentioned, his health is always kind of a question mark. So, yeah, that might influence things too. Right. So McVay, we kind of mentioned how he's the worst possible coach for a tank job, but I just love that stat you tweeted about the Rams dedicating 34.3% of their entire salary cap to players not on the roster. That that's got to be close to an NFL record.
I would assume that it is. I don't
Yeah.
know for a fact. I can't say, but I'm very confident that that has to be a record. I mean, we're talking almost 40%, right? It's just like, that's absolutely outrageous. So like I mentioned, a few minutes ago, they ate as much dead possible cap as they could this year. And that was the plan, right? They were going to trim the roster as much as possible. And the way that the Rams go about the salary cap is in a bit of a unique way. They've been aggressive, obviously, the past few years, and kudos to them. Obviously, it worked out. But that forced them to be in this position now. At some point, that pill was going to come, and they decided to just kind of swallow it whole this past offseason. That's why they're paying a lot of guys that aren't on this roster, whether that's Andrew Whitworth for retirement reasons, or a Leonard Floyd who's playing good in Buffalo, or all these countless other players. So Jalen Ramsey, and whatnot. So yeah, a lot of dead money right now, and that's part of the reason why they are sort of roster strapped. There's only so much you could do when you don't have a first round pick, or you don't have 40% of your available cap space to dedicate to current roster players. And that was part of the decision that they made. And ultimately, I think it's hopefully going to work out. This offseason, they're going to have a lot of money to play with, and the decisions that they make are ultimately going to decide whether this was the right call or not. But anything can happen. I think I start to think back to that 2017 offseason where Sean McVay comes into the door, and right away they add two very franchise cornerstone style transitional pieces in Andrew Whitworth and Robert Woods in free agency. And those two guys were huge pillars to turning around the culture, and obviously, great performing players as well. And that was, I think, part of the huge, turnaround that really got them and propelled them to that Super Bowl in 2018. So, the opportunities are there for them this offseason. And oddly enough for them, there's a lot of positions that kind of line up too. Edge rusher is going to be absolutely loaded, or as of now, before the franchise tag starts to come around and all that, it should be, very, very powerful in terms of the class available. And, the Rams are obviously very, very bad at edge rusher. So a lot of things line up for them here.
Interesting. So one to keep an eye on, especially with Sean McVay at the helm. Now, what do you think? The Rams are coming off a bye week, which helps Stafford get back and all that good stuff. But given they've lost 3 in a row, is there one thing or a couple of things you can think of that they've been focused on in the bye week, trying to improve, trying to correct?
Yeah, I don't know that I can necessarily pinpoint any one particular area for them, to have to improve this past this bye week. Health is always going to be a huge thing in the NFL, and you mentioned Matthew Stafford, right tackle Rob Havenstein should be back coming out of the bye week. Kyron Williams probably a week closer to coming back as well. And I think it's just a chance to like refocus. There was a lot of uncharacteristic things that the Rams sort of went through these past few weeks where, Cooper Cup's the one guy you probably bet everything on, and he's come up with some drop issues and stuff that, typically hasn't been in his forte. So just a lot of little things I think for the Rams is good to step back. Obviously it helps that it comes at this point in time when you're in a 3-game losing skid and you're trying to get your quarterback healthy and all these guys back. And then, I think on the flip side, this is a bit of a unique Rams team because generally they will stick to their guys and I don't want to say they're hard-headed and they refuse to admit or acknowledge a mistake in the sense that we're starting this guy and he's clearly just not cut for it. But I think this season they've been much more open to making those changes as opposed to past seasons where they've been more reluctant. And you've seen that at right guard where Joe Noteboom gets swapped out for Kevin Dotson, who's ultimately significantly better. You see it on the defensive side of the ball where, Darion Kendrick on the boundary at corner, he gets pulled and now they're starting to kick out Kobe Durant that way. And then, they're sliding in a safety, kind of big nickel safety type of thing there. So I think, even just taking this week to step back, really reevaluate all the tape and be open to sort of moving some pieces around if need be. I think that's a big thing. And ultimately we'll see how it kind of comes out of this bye. But I think they just had to take this week to sort of decompress, step back, try to break that skid, get their minds right, obviously get healthy, and then, just look at this second half of the season. From their perspective, the schedule is quite favorable. So me knowing where this team's at, I would prefer that they lose out. But that is, that's not how the NFL works. So
No, that is fascinating how they've kind of been a bit cutthroat with almost churning, not cutting guys in terms of the roster, but tweaking the lineup, and maybe that bye week does see some more churn, et cetera, et cetera. But with Matthew Stafford back and you talking about the schedule being favorable and the fact that, the Seahawks, when they did the double over the Rams last year, won both their games, but that was their first road victory since 2017. So they have not been very good in Los Angeles. And with Stafford back, McVay at the helm, the receivers looking like absolute studs, the way that the Rams, week one was that kind of game where they were using all the like head start, cheat motion or whatever you want to call it, and lots of condensed sets, and Seattle just didn't have a clue what to do really. Is this offense just going to cause Seattle problems yet again? Because they always seem to be one step ahead of what Seattle's doing defensively. McVay has Pete Carroll's number in the main.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, your answer is as good as mine. We'll see. I'm excited to see kind of how they come out of this bye week. I generally don't think it's been too much of an issue of schematics. I think it's been more of an issue of execution, which is generally the case, right? In the NFL, probably someone's going to be open. That's just the way the game goes. But I think the Rams are still kind of identityless, if that, that's not even a word, if that lack of identity. Yes. Lack an identity on offense there. There's just too much variance, I think, when it comes to week, which is maybe a good thing to some extent. You want to obviously attack your enemies where they're weak, but at the same time, there's no one thing that I think they can truly rely on that they feel great about, that they, we know this is what they can do and this is, how they're built. 1 week they're going to be a downfield passing attack. The next week it's, start to get under center a little bit more and, some play action stuff. And then the next week they're going to run the ball 40 times out of nowhere. And, the next week they all of a sudden don't run the ball at all. It's just very confusing. So I think they're still trying to figure out exactly what, how this offense is best operative, I guess. And so, I'm interested to see how they're going to play it. Obviously these division games are generally closer than other games, and you generally know what each team is going to do. And like you mentioned, week one is unique in the sense that it's a new season. There's a lot of new tricks to each playbook, and it's a lot harder to scheme and game plan for somebody in week one than it is week 11. So now you got 10 or so weeks of tape and film available to you. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen. I at the end of the day, it's going to be an execution game, and I think it'll be much closer than the first one. But we'll see. I'm excited to see what's going to happen. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, that kind of lacking an identity, or being kind of schizophrenic week to week, or really changing it. Maybe in the bye week, that's something they've honed. Maybe it also speaks to the fact that they're having to coach their ass off each week to try and eke out a win. And if that means being a completely different thing, then that's what they're going to have to try to do to exploit their specific weakness, which you may think is obvious with coaching, but at a certain point that there's diminishing returns, I'd say, to that. One thing which stood out to me is Sports Info Solutions saying Stafford has 14 completions of 20 yards plus, which is only 4 behind the NFL leader CJ Stroud. And obviously Stafford's missed 3 games.
Like 1.5 ish.
1.5, right? Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of impressive to me. And what does help him is Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, the 2 wide receivers. And Sosa, given your background as well, who is the better duo, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua over the middle, or Ivan Rakitic and Luka Modric in the middle?
That's a good question. This one took me a little bit of scheming, game planning, and I'm gonna be biased either way here. No matter which way I go, right? So, I think I would tend to lean probably the Croatian midfield duo Rakitic and Modric. I think with Luka, you're talking about an all-time, great, and obviously again, I'm biased. In my opinion, the best midfielder ever, holding mid. So, like we're talking Xavi levels, Iniesta, these
Absolutely.
guys. Yeah. So, and he just gets better with age, right? At this point, it's like, I feel bad for him because, especially when it comes to Croatia, he's the full engine of everything goes through. The build-up play is going to go through him. The counterattack is going to go through him. But, there's just such a lackluster back line that he has to drop back so far all the time as well. So he's covering a ton of ground. So at his age, obviously you want to try to limit that as much as possible. But yeah, I tend to lean with those guys. Obviously both great duos. And I still think we're waiting to fully see, Cooper Kupp healthy and unleashed, Puka Nacua healthy and unleashed together, because it just hasn't happened yet, right? It's been like, Puka's killing it for 4 weeks while Kupp's out, then Kupp comes back, he kills it for a week or two, and Puka's kind of been off, and then now it's like Kupp has just been very quiet the last 2 or 3 games, a couple of drops, obviously backup quarterback's not going to help, but then Puka goes off, so I think we're still waiting to fully see them kind of locked in together, and shoot, that could happen as soon as this week, right, with Stafford finally back, and I'm excited to see that. So that's one thing that I think, I'm very, very excited to see what happens with this second half of the schedule.
Yeah, because both those guys, Kupp and Puka, they can kind of do a bit of everything. Something Pete Carroll spoke about in his press conference this week. And so who gets what and when, what spot Stafford decides to go to either of them is interesting to me. But yeah, I mean, Modric has won the Ballon d'Or. So for those who aren't into their soccer, best player in the world, which for a kind of centre midfielder, not a guy who scores all the goals, is very impressive. Cooper Kupp, he has the triple crown, but interesting. But yeah, Puka's best football definitely to come, you would think. Right. Defensively, interestingly, the Rams are 22nd in EPA per play on offense, 19th in success rate, which not great. 23rd drop back EPA. Wait, hang on a second. My apologies. The Rams defense, 22nd in EPA per play, 19th in success rate, 23rd drop back EPA, 25th drop back success rate, 17th rush EPA, 16th rush success rate, whereas Seattle's offense is 10th in offense total points, 12th, 10th in offense total points per PFF, whereas the Rams defense is 27th. So this defense is kind of the weak point because the Rams offense, even without Stafford, has been like middle to high in total points per Sports Info Solutions. I saw in week 1, the unit was kind of a bunch of unknowns with Aaron Donald. Byron Young's emerged. He has 5 sacks, just half a sack behind Donald. But is there anyone else? That sounds ignorant. You would know better than me. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few players that, you can highlight on that side of the ball. Ernest Jones, the linebacker. He's really developing into a good player, very versatile. I sort of look at him similar to like a Shaq Leonard style player where he's a little bit leaner, maybe not going to be able to kind of bang with guards, like your 260-pound Brian Urlacher from 15 years ago, but a little bit more
Football's
athletic.
changed.
Yes, it has changed a little bit. Your linebacker's 220 pounds now. So he's kind of built in that mold. He's been a really, really good player for the Rams. He's missed a little bit of time recently. I think 1 game, if I'm not mistaken. So will be good to get him back. Obviously, the signal caller, the defense is going to get everyone lined up as well. On the back end, I think Akello Witherspoon's been a guy that has been pretty good for the Rams, which, he's been at a few stops in the NFC West.
Yep, Seattle
Yeah.
revenge game again.
Correct. Yes, he's been in San Fran, and he
Yep.
played good against San Fran as well too. So, he's he's going to get beat. There's certain times where he gets a little bit aggressive. I think he can bite on a double move, and there's been maybe 2 or 3 plays where there's probably should have been a long touchdown in his coverage, but generally been a very competitive player. He does a pretty good job at staying, in phase, and he's aggressive. He will go fight for the ball. So he's definitely been the best corner on the team. There's no doubt about that in my mind. So those are probably the 2 players that I think, I would highlight outside of Aaron Donald, obviously, and Byron Young. And then, on the back end, I think one that's kind of interesting that I'm circling to sort of look at is their new nickelback is Quentin Lake. He's kind of like a safety, big nickel type player. Didn't play a ton early in the season. He was more of a sub-package style player where they would bring him on and play that kind of, rat style role there. And now he's sort of taken on a bigger role with Darion Kendrick being benched. So generally, he's not going to be able to break down with guys that are super shifty in the mold of a safety. But very excited to see, how he pans out and how he can kind of hold his own there at nickelback. So
Another Les Snead day 3 pick, contributing, doing good stuff. How annoying from a Seahawks perspective. So Seattle did completely collapse in the second half of that week 1 game. So much so that, I mean, you probably haven't been paying attention to this like I have. But Pete Carroll, like every week in his radio show, he's been like, damn, that Rams game, I really messed that up. And he just keeps talking about it unprompted. Like they could ask him about the weather. He'd be like, yeah, the weather's nice. But the Rams game, I completely blew it. So it seemed to me from the outside, looking in and kind of what came out afterwards, that at halftime, firstly, they overbuilt up the fixture to begin the game. And then at halftime, some weird kind of complacency crept in where they probably said some wild stuff like, let's go beat this team by 50 to whatever. And then they got completely done in. Now, I see Jack in the chat, you're saying the key to beating the Rams is running the ball. Well, interestingly, the pass defense per the kind of advanced stuff is worse than the rush defense. Rush is like middle tier, pass defense like bottom, 3rd, 5th. But where was I going with this? What was my question? Do you think the Rams defense after that first half has a recipe? I know you're familiar with Geno Smith, Seattle's weapons. How do you view that matchup?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to expect this Seattle offense to have a large advantage going into this game. I just generally do. I mean, across the board at receiver is going to be in favor of the Seattle Seahawks, obviously. I think, tight end is probably, a 50-50 style kind of battle. Obviously, no Fant, not the most featured tight end in the league. And then the backfield, there's just so much variety there. Obviously there's a lot of explosion there with Kenneth Walker, and then you sub in the rookie who looks like he wants to like end someone's career every time he plays, Charbonnet. It's gonna be tough for the Rams, man. I don't know how they're gonna eke out of this one. Obviously, again, like I mentioned, there's only so much you can kind of surprise each other with at this point. We're later in the season, you're divisional rivals. There's at this point it's sort of a hat on a hat, man on a man kind of thing who's going to execute. So generally speaking, if that right tackle's back, that will certainly help, I would assume, with that pass rush in terms of Byron Young. And then obviously Aaron Donald's going to be the key up front, as always. You can put 2 or 3 guys there. I think the advantage has to go to Seattle offensively. So I would be, surprised if it's a very unproductive game on that side of the ball for Seattle. But I'm interested to see, just because this side of the ball for the Rams, there's just I give them credit because I think they're outperforming my expectations. I generally thought they would be the worst defense in football, if not, second worst, because Arizona's depth chart was god awful on that side of the ball too. But they've been, a lot better than what I thought. Not good, still probably below league average, in that bottom third, like you mentioned, but better than what I expected. So I will give them credit for battling and keeping, they're trying their best, but definitely just a lack of, talent at some point is going to catch up to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, criticizing effort is kind of, I'm not that big a believer in it unless it's like egregious. Like a lot of things can happen on a football play, but Aaron Donald's still playing hard. Like I'm sure his legacy is motivating him. You haven't seen him checking out or anything.
No, he's which is strange to me. I thought, maybe with how the Rams have gone about things,
Right,
they've
because
purposely.
it's just him, like we've
Yeah,
been saying. Yeah.
I mean, even Raheem Morris said it. He's like, Aaron Donald. It's just Aaron Donald and a bunch of guys. Like he insulted his own players. So, and the
Wow.
Rams have done right by their players in the sense that they'll generally take less compensation to put their guys in spots where they think is respectable to them. They did it with Robert Woods. They did it with Jalen Ramsey. They've done it with multiple guys across the board. And so you would think, Aaron Donald at this point in his career, he would probably want to go compete. He's only got maybe a year or two left before that contract is up. And he's got a no trade clause, so he's got all leverage to keep himself in LA, and he keeps saying he wants to stay there. So I don't know if he's fully bought into the idea that that final year of his contract, they're going to push the chips in the middle and maybe give him one more shot to go get it. But it's definitely crept up in the back of my mind where it's like this guy is done. I mean, he's a legendary player across the board. You got to do right by him. So I've thought, maybe it's time to kind of let him start to seek other opportunities. But he seems adamant he wants to stay. So that effort's never going to drop off. And like you said, he's doing it for bigger reasons. Obviously, he could be, on the Mount Rushmore of defensive players ever. So
There you go. Yeah, and kind of touching on something we spoke about. Well, you sort of mentioned. I'm really interested to see is from a not just defense versus offense, or one side of the ball, but both sides of the ball, seeing how the Seahawks approach a second game versus the same opponent. Because the first time for Seattle, is it for the Rams? Should be.
yeah, it is.
They haven't played another divisional team. Yeah.
Nope. Yeah, it's the second game.
So that's probably where, like, schematically it gets really kind of honed in, dialed in. And Seattle schematically in week one, they were trying a lot of stuff, probably too much stuff. Like the pass rush, for instance, they were throwing everything at the wall and none of it really stuck. And they were kind of running into each other and looking confused. So something to look forward to also. Sosa, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to promote? You can follow Sosa at QB's MVP. NFL info, Underdog Fantasy, anything else?
That is all. Yeah, you could find everything we do at Underdog, at Underdog _ NFL. That's generally where I spend 95% of my life. So, the fastest updates in the game in terms of injuries and all that kind of interesting stuff. So,
yeah, it's kind of wild. I'm scrolling the timeline and I'm like, whoa, that's quick. So usually the first one. So you're doing a great job there. And everyone at Underdog, good people. So make sure you check them out. Thank you very much. I should mention also that the Seahawks are, I think they're -1 favorites, but that might have changed to, yeah, I think that's correct. -1 favorites. So going to be a tight game per Las Vegas. All right. Thank you, everyone. Please do like the video, comment down below. Follow me at Matty F. Brown. Follow the podcast at Seattle Overload to know when we're going live. And if you're listening, please do give us a 5-star review. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.